Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Douglas, and I'm proud to say that I am a United Nations messenger of peace, and I'm focused in the area of disarmament. And you might ask, why disarmament? Well, it goes back to 1979. I was making a movie called The China Syndrome, which is about a meltdown in a nuclear power plant. And as I was doing my homework and understanding more about the half-life of plutonium and just the incredible immensity and enormity of a nuclear weapon, it really scared the hell out of me. And so I began working in disarmament back then, at that time, in terms of reduction of nuclear weapons, which has been a long haul. In the area of small arms, I was in New York City in 1980, in the wintertime, Christmas time, and I was walking home to my apartment on the west side of New York, and I happened to pass when John Lennon had been assassinated. And I knew John, and the friend of mine that I was traveling with at the time, we began to form an organization called Ceasefire. And that was the efforts I started to begin making in reduction of assault weapons and small arms. And these have been the two areas that I focused most with the United Nations, the most difficult ones to deal with. But I'm very, very proud of my time spending with the United Nations. Thank you for being with us. I'm looking forward to my discussion with Ishmael.
Hello, my name is Ishmael Beah. I was born in Sierra Leone in West Africa, and I am the New York Times and international best-selling author of A Long Way Gone, Memoirs of a Boy Soldier, which is an account of my experiences growing up in Sierra Leone during the war and serving as a child soldier in that war, and then coming out of that war. I've had two other books, Radiance of Tomorrow, which is also bestsellers, and of recent, Little Family. I am also a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador for children affected by war and conflict. So I specifically deal with issues that deals with protection and creating policy and international legal standards to prevent violence against children in times of war and after war, but also how to control the sale and use of small arms in places where there are ongoing civil wars or continuing wars. I currently live in Los Angeles, California, and I'm a father of my own little rebels, if I call them beautiful rebels. Three of them, twins that are 3, and then a 6-year-old, our first daughter. And so, yeah, I'm delighted to chat with Michael. Our paths had crossed many years ago through the United Nations, and it's wonderful to be back together again, particularly in these trying times, to have a discussion about the fate of the world that we're living in.
So I guess the first issue, you being in Los Angeles and I'm back here in New York, we're pretty much have gone through being the hardest hit area in the States. New York has gone from being the worst to probably the best in terms of its recovery. Whereas I'm looking forward to getting out to Los Angeles, but I'm seeing the count going up. So how are you doing, or how much is you living in Southern California? That seems to be much more effective than Northern California.
Yes, I'm living on the west side of Los Angeles. Actually, I live in the Santa Monica, Malibu area, and so it's been. I think in the beginning, obviously, when the pandemic started, there were less cases here. I think partly because of how spread out Los Angeles is. New York. I used to live in New York as well, and I know no matter how spread out New York is, everybody's stuck on top of each other to some extent. So clearly, it was the possibility that it would be the center of it was very evident. Here, it's been interesting because I guess the weather is also nice, so there's always tempting to control people to stay away from public spaces. And there are some people who have been pushing to go out, to exercise what they call your freedom to be out and about, which I find interesting as somebody who's come from places where we've gone through several difficulties. You realize that oftentimes you need to perhaps to rethink what your freedom means for the public good, you know. So it's been very difficult to have that conversation with people. But you know, I've managed to stay safe. It's not my first pandemic or episode in the world, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
how is New York? How are you faring in New York? You know, I know New York very well. I know it's difficult to get around. Yeah.
Well, we live about 25 minutes outside. We've been quarantined since the first week in March, so we're 3.5 months, and things don't look like they're changing that quickly. My kids are a little older than yours. I've got a 17 and a 19-year-old with us, so they can entertain themselves a little better. I have no idea what it's like to deal with kids your age over this long a period of time. But I'm sure I mean, for us, it's been a wonderful family time. Sometime, whereas my kids are away in college and they're away, and we never anticipated being able to have this amount of time together again. So I've tried to remind myself about that and cherish this time. But we're stretching the limits now, and it's frustrating to see how the numbers are spiking up. But at the same time, I understand how people start going a little crazy and being locked down for so long and acting out. So I can't imagine how you full time. Your wife's name is Priscilla.
Yes.
Okay, good.
But Priscilla also is a human rights attorney. She used to work for the United Nations as well. She still does consulting for them, specifically to negotiate the release of children from armed groups. And through that, our children, we've traveled and lived in different countries every 2 years. So the kids are used to, they kind of understand a little bit of emergencies, but it's been,
Right.
in my case, I'm always traveling, whether for UN work or for my writing career. And so, you know, as you said, it's been a welcome time to be home, but to also observe how my children learn, you know, because we have to become teachers to them, to teach them what they were learning in school. It's been very interesting to see that, you know, and to observe their thinking process and all of these things. But I wanted to ask you a question regarding, you know, you've traveled on behalf of the UN and seen the world and seen different realities in the world. And I think in a lot of people's widest imagination, they would have never uh, believed that such a thing would happen in the United States, and the response would be what it had been, to the point that if they've always been situations that people view outside of the United States. And I think for a lot of people, this is the first time that they find themselves faced with a situation where they kind of don't know what to do with it. What has been your take on that, based on?
The United States is very vulnerable, and I think have been stunned and shocked by this vulnerability. One of the most extraordinary things about this pandemic, you know, worldwide, it doesn't matter how wealthy you are or how poor you are, but this has been a leveler. This has really been a leveler. So I know all the terrible things that this pandemic has created, and I guess I keep trying to look for the positive aspects that are coming out of this whole pandemic. And I guess one of the first things that I noticed in the early aerial pictures back as early as March, April, was the quality of air and the visibility. And we see these photographs of Delhi where you can see the Himalayas for the first time in history, or shots of Los Angeles. And all over, I was shocked in such a short period of time with the removal of carbon gases from automobiles and everything, how much the quality of air improved. And I thought that must have been a strong point to start off with in terms of our climate change and working towards that. So I take that as a positive and hope that that's going to move our climate change.
Mm.
And by that, the next thing that comes out um, is what industry are really important. Are we going to try to rebuild all this damage that's happened and put band-aids on everything, or are we going to start fresh? For instance, I see this as a really perfect time to really aggressively pursue alternative energy, alt fuels. I hope that the next president or whomever that might be will put a cap on oil and gas rather than nurturing. I think it's time to make a dramatic change, or not. But I see this going hand in hand in a number of areas. Economically, the United States, the richest country in the history of the world, is suffering terrible economic losses that has made us as vulnerable as a lot of other countries. And I think with this change in status of wealth, maybe we can start thinking about working together in terms of restructuring our balances of wealth. Again, it would be a natural opportunity. So as we start up our labor forces, maybe we can start thinking more in terms of what we can do to make it a more equitable situation for everybody. So I mean, those are a couple of areas right off the bat that have struck me, you know, watching this pandemic. Something else closer to home for both of us, Ishmael, that bothers or concerns me is the United Nations. This has been since World War II, and liberal democracies come in for the last 75 years, has allowed our planet to function very, very well. And I personally admire the United Nations so much, not so much of what it's accomplished, but what it's in principle, what it can do. And so to see the attacks on the United Nations, to see the attacks on WHO, the World Health Organization, to see the attacks on the criminal justice system, all are such strategically important areas of the United Nations that I hope we can enhance and nurture as we go through this pandemic. They've suffered a lot, and I'm uncomfortable with the element of how they have abandoned the United Nations. And at the same time, I think the United Nations has to look at how can we strengthen ourselves. We seem stuck with the Security Council. It's frozen in terms of getting things done. So I'm hoping that will be something too that will be reviewed in the future.
Yeah. No, I certainly agree with you. I think there is a moment now in the world where we can go several ways. As you said, we could restart certain things, really take an intelligent and human look at how we have dealt with each other, or we can go back to how we have been. And we clearly know that that is not going to get us anywhere. And I think for me, as somebody who's lived between cultures in the African continent and then here in the United States, you know, one of the things that's very prevalent to me is the fact that over the years, there's been such a push on individuality and as opposed to community. People have forgotten that we're each other's keepers. And that push has driven this human connection apart. And that feeds into how companies operate, how the economy operates, how justice, the idea of equality operates. And so with this pandemic and with everything as it's unfolding, all of that has shattered. And people have come to realize that you are not alone. You can't be by yourself. You know, America, society, at least the people that I've encountered in it have prided themselves of being independent. I'm my own. I can be on my own. I'm, you know, and then all of a sudden pandemic forced everybody inside and people realize that they cannot be on their own actually. It's actually difficult. The very fact of seeing another human being brings something to your humanity, which is what African countries and other older sort of civilizations have always known. And so it's really interesting to how we're going to come out of this. Are we going to come out of this really understanding this? Or are we going to come out of it and go back to how things have been? Because you and I both work for the United Nations and we sort of see how human nature is so stubborn that sometimes it just wants to go back to what it knows without actually taking that leap. But my worry really is that are the institutions going to be ready? Are they I'd say a willingness, a political willingness, a social willingness for some people to be uncomfortable, to make certain changes that will work for all of us? I wish I would be optimistic to say that. But I think it's going to require a lot of work. I believe empathy is not just an idea. It is actually a practice that you do. It's a work that you have to put in place, which can lead to a lot of discomfort, which is going to allow a lot of people to be honest with themselves. Where are we? What are we doing? What do we allow ourselves to be bystanders of without paying attention to? For the United Nations, you know, I believe it does have potential, but they also, you know, I work for them and I've always said to them is that it does also need a lot of improvement. I think they need to hire different kinds of people. The bureaucracy needs to stop. It needs to be run by a few countries who call the shots, and who do not necessarily pay their dues. So there's a lot of things that need to change. And I just hope that as human beings, the bottom line of it is that we realize that our actions towards each other, particularly how we look at the value of each other's life, irrespective of where you are, what you look like, where you're born. If that changes, I believe we will start off right. But if we just go back and find a band-aid and just to put on this, it's going to explode in different ways again.
Yeah, I agree with Ishmael. I don't think this is a time for a band-aid. And I think as you're seeing the protests, I mean, out of this terrible tragedy of these shootings, which unfortunately is nothing new in the States, but there seems to be a coalescing that's never happened before. And that basically is, I think, partially because your first time that you're really seeing substantial amounts of white populace supporting these movements too, which hasn't happened before. And I think this is all part of the same movement that's happening, for instance, with the NRA, where congressmen and senators used to push to get that NRA approval or sealing. Now they're running for the hills to get away from it. But this is all part of what I hope is going to be a dramatic turnaround. A long time coming. I'm interested, Ishmael, about if you have much. I don't know how much family. I know you lost a lot of family in Sierra Leone. I don't know how much you have back, but what is the status of the COVID-19 in Africa? I have seen a few figures on countries. I know South Africa is not doing very well, but I didn't know what other countries are having a difficult time with the pandemic.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I'll definitely answer that, but I wanted to just speak back a little bit on what you talked about race relations and what's going on in this country now that has sort of happened during COVID. I think, I was mentioning earlier about this sort of the how human beings are always able to normalize certain situations, particularly when it's not affecting them. I came to this country as an immigrant, but I think one of the things that I was very aware of when I came was not the fact that I was an immigrant, but was the fact that I was a Black person as soon as I entered this country. I remember I was living in New York and I was adopted in a Jewish family, white Jewish family in New York, a wonderful family. But the area that I lived, I quickly realized that every time I would come in with my key to open the door, I was living in the East Village. Another person coming down would close the door because there was this belief that I didn't belong there. And I was thinking to myself, why is that so weird? This is so strange. Why all of a sudden think that I don't believe it instead of asking me, hey, do you live in this building? That could start a conversation. So, and then after that, Amadou Diallo was shot. It was a Guinean fellow in New York who was shot like 47 times. And I love going for jogs. And since that day, I never went for a run in the United States. So if I did go, I would go with somebody else, several people, or I will make sure that I had, or if I get in a car to drive, I'll make sure that my license is somewhere where I can see it. I have a son who's 3 years old. When he started talking about how he loved police, I have to tell him that police are not good people because I have not had an experience with them. So it's really interesting that now, because of what happened with George Floyd, that because we had the technology and we kind of have cameras that can show this now, people are beginning to see it, and therefore it's undeniably in their face and they have to face it. And so we have this outpouring support that is quite wonderful. People are reading books about anti-racism and things, and everybody thinks that something is done. But my question I keep asking myself is that why didn't people know that this was going on? Because a lot of us who are visibly Black have been going through this every single day of our lives. That you get in a car, you've got to hope that you come back home alive, So it's been going on quite a lot. So for me, it's a bit difficult to understand why people did not know about it. Is it because it did not affect them, or they did not see it, and now because of technology and phones, it's naked in front of people's eyes, therefore we can really think about it? And this is not just the United States. This is a global thing. It's always been going on. I'll give you one quick example, and I'll answer the question about Sierra Leone. When I travel for work, it doesn't matter who I am, what I know. From the get-go, I have to fight to constantly explain to people that I belong where I'm supposed to be going. For example, even my chauffeur who comes to pick me up, I have to convince him that I'm the right guy because I'm black and he doesn't want to pick me up, and I have to call the company. Each time I have to fight. If I show up at the airport and I stand in line, because I can afford it, and also because, that's some part of my contract is I fly business. Each time I stand in line to get my ticket to board a plane, I'm told, "Excuse me, sir, this is a line for business class." And I always think to myself, but they only say that because I'm black. There's no other reason. So these microaggressions have always happened. They've always been going on, where you feel belittled, your humanity is belittled over and over again. So for me, it's really incredible that people have not noticed that. And only now that everybody's wanting to read a book so that they can know how to be anti-racist. And it's like when 9/11 happened, everybody was like, "Oh, the Middle East exists, let's have Middle East courses in universities now." So the Middle East has always been there. But anyway, so it's just a bit difficult as a black person, but also as a black father, particularly, how you have to explain to your child at a very young age that the very people that are supposed to protect them could take their lives, so therefore they can't trust them. And my son were once at LAX, and this police officer gave my son a little badge, and I had to take it from him, even though he loved it, because I didn't want him to think that it was anything, a shield of protection, because that's not how I've seen it. That's not why when I've been pulled over, guns have been taken out of the holster. Just I wasn't doing anything just because I was driving a car that maybe I wasn't supposed to be driving. I don't know, even though it's my car. But anyway, we can go on and on. But I do, again, like I said, I do hope we come out of this really thinking deeply about what each of our commitments are. In terms of Sierra Leone, in my own country, in general, in West Africa, the numbers have been climbing, but they've been able to manage it. And as you know very well, we've had an experience already with pandemic in Sierra Leone, and in general West Africa, we had the Ebola crisis, which is kind of similar to COVID. So I think we were able to deal with it. We kind of learned how to do certain things. And also, I think one of the biggest differences in most African countries, why the situation is not getting out of hand, is that people are used to crisis. So they are used to knowing when to abide by the law and not say that I need my liberty, I need to express myself, I need this, I need to go back to what they're. If anything, the only difficulty is that they're thinking, well, we can't go to work, how are we going to eat? But they are not complaining about the fact that they need to stay inside because they know what this means. They've been through similar situations. So in that case, I think we've been all right. But if this continues on longer, I think it's going to have a really strong effect on us, because we rely on a lot of trade and economics and the import of things. And so, but I wanted to pivot a little bit because you mentioned about the NRA in this country. And I know that you work a lot on disarmament and gun control globally. And I just wanted to talk a little bit because I've always been, as somebody who was a child who went through war and I came to live in the United States, I've always been really perplexed at the fact that why would people want to have so much weapons? I come from a war-torn country where people don't want to have weapons at home. Um, so I've always, so maybe vis-a-vis gun control United States slash what we do with the UN to make sure that there's no proliferation of small arms around the world, and we know what that does. We've been in places. So I don't know, maybe if you could just talk a little bit comparing those two things.
Well, I'm always drawn back to President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who said, "Beware of the military-industrial complex." And somehow we always constantly seem to be driven militarily for business reasons more than anything else. And I think the NRA, which has largely been sponsored and supported by gun companies, gun issues factories, lobby organizations like that, cloaked in the Second Amendment in terms of the right to bear arms, has created this formula, this attitude. I was really worried when we first started this pandemic, when you heard the number of people who were buying guns for their first time. It was a staggering number. And I know I was very, very concerned as we began this isolation and as people were under economic pressure, people are drinking and drugging more than they normally did as they stayed at home, that we would get much more of an outburst of weapons, which fortunately has not happened. But I think what you said, Ishmael, is true, that it is the camera. It is the fact that the transparency has come through us being able to see these situations. With the Floyd situation in Minneapolis, it was so obvious and so clear to so many people that there was no argument. In all the situations where we have had video presence, the questions have become much clearer than they were before. And so I hope for that matter alone, and it's reached this point where people cannot argue with what they're seeing. And then now as I begin to see, so it's not a racial issue, i.e. black versus white, it's black and white. It's a political issue now, much more than it ever was before. And I'm hopefully, it really strongly believe that we really have an opportunity to make a large jump in our racial division. The other issue being the economics. When you start seeing the proportion of black and brown people who have been kicked down, knocked down by this COVID next to white people, you understand why. I mean, especially you're from New York, you understand the housing situations, how people are focused into small groups, and it's much more likely to get the disease. So hopefully, I'm feeling positive out of this whole thing. I had my whole belief comes. I don't know. Do you know a guy named Buckminster Fuller? You ever heard about Buckminster Fuller?
I have heard of the name.
Buckminster Fuller was an architect, a scientist, designer of the geodesic dome. And when I was back in college in the 1960s, he came and he spoke at our college. And he had a book called Spaceship Earth. And that was the first time when I got the real sense of how tiny this planet is that we're on, where we have yet to find any other beings out there. You look up in the sky at night and all you see is billions of stars going on forever, light years of distances. And so far, this is the only place that we found human life. And I cannot believe, as I sit here today, with the divisions that's going on between some of our major countries, as well as our small ones, that such division exists in a tiny, tiny planet where we have no sense of any other life existing. How or why can we reach that? So maybe in a situation like this, particularly when you're saying about the economic issues, I mean, there's no reason. There's enough food to take care of everybody on this planet. Competition is healthy, but when it reaches points of polarity, it doesn't help us as a planet. And this is what my belief and why I feel so strongly about the United Nations. There is no organization around that exists that has the ability to deal with all these issues. And so our country, I don't know, are you a U.S. citizen now, or do you still have your...
Yes, I am. I am a dual citizen, so yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. But, you know, for a country, again, that I say, it is the wealthiest and richest country that's ever existed in the history of human beings, that we have been humbled, and I hope open enough to try to see what else we can do to try to bring this planet closer together, understanding how each of us think. And the transparency that's existed with this pandemic, I believe, is going to bring the vulnerability for all of us to understand that no matter how rich I am or how poor somebody is somewhere else, this pandemic is a leveler. This is an equalizer for all of us, and will work positively in that area.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, you mentioned earlier about how you can see how the environment is clearing up itself because the human presence is less and intrusion is less. Over the years, people through the United Nations have put statistics out about, about climate change, or about the fact that we need to not sell weapons to certain people who are going to use it to discriminate it. And everybody's always say, it's not our business, it's not our business. And then here comes this pandemic that sort of basically shuts down the globe, shuts down the entire world. And we are all have a common enemy. And then within our different social structures, we're beginning to unravel certain things that perhaps uh, we were too busy chasing whatever it is that we were chasing that we not really think about. So I hope this moment has also allowed a lot of us, by being inside, to reevaluate how we want to go forward in the best way possible. I really think the United Nations has potential. I am sitting here in front of you, and I came out of that war in Sierra Leone. I was removed because that body exists. Otherwise, there was no organization that was going to go remove me as a child in the war in Sierra Leone and rehabilitate me, and then I'll be able to have the future that I have now, to be a writer that actually, uh, contributes to the social fabric of the world. If such an organization did not exist, I would not be able to come out. So for me, whenever people, talk about the United Nations, I always use myself as an example. I survived, I lived, I'm able to be alive today and do the things I'm doing in my life because that organization created a platform and created opportunity, created certain people who can go in and challenge certain things so that people like me can live.
Right.
So it's the power that it has is remarkable. Now it can be used more efficiently if certain people are not in its way, and we know who those people are. You mentioned the Security Council earlier. So I think this is really a moment where we can remind people why such organizations are important. But for me as a writer, I've been thinking about what is my role, in the world. And I always go back to my own upbringing. I grew up in a very small village. You've been to Sierra Leone. There are some very nice, beautiful rural parts that I grew up where I didn't have electricity or tap water. But what I had that was very, very important were stories. I grew up in oral tradition storytelling, and my grandmother, who the women were the carriers of the stories in my community, used to tell me that stories are medicine that are poured into you to strengthen you to be able to face life, because life would always try to break you, no matter who you are, what you are. But if you have this medicine of stories within your veins, then the breakage would not, you would not snap necessarily. You would know how to be resilient, basically. So for me, when I started writing, I always thought about whatever I write, it should be a small medicine that I pour into the world to move humanity along a little bit in terms of thinking about how we take care of each other, how we walk in each other's shoes and understand that there's more we have in common than the things that usually separate us, and so I wanted to ask you, I guess, by saying this, that what is your biggest, where do you draw the strength from this social commitment that you have in terms of being involved in how the world can be better? Where do you draw that strength from? Because there's so many things that are discouraging in the world, and it's easy for people to just be like, you know what, I give up. I'm just gonna do my own thing. What makes you continue to be involved in the world the way you are?
I think I would have to give a lot of credit to my father, Kirk Douglas, who we lost this last February. He passed away, and unfortunately, we were able to bury him. But as far as having a memorial service for him and for all of his friends and fans who had to put that off for a while, and we'll see. But Dad, who was born in this country the year after they arrived from Belarus, a Russian Jew, with a family that was illiterate and extremely poor, totally poor, got out of poverty, became an actor and successful, but always maintained a concern. And I think in the Jewish faith, it's called tikkun uman, which means to improve the world or to repair the world, is part of your character. So I think watching my father growing up possibly played a large part of it. Also of the generation that I grew up with in the '60s. At that time, in terms of the peace movement and the Vietnam War that was going on, all played some degree of a part.
I actually want to ask you a question. You know, I've watched a lot of your films, which you've had a remarkable career, and I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your father and the fact that you haven't been able to have the celebrations of his life the way you want to. You know, in my culture in Sierra Leone, we believe that in my tribe, we believe that when someone passed away, they're only gone in the physical form. That who they have been and what they have left within us is what will continue to live. So I hope you would borrow this wisdom from us. But I wanted to ask you, not on a lighter note, you know, one of your films, I've watched many of your films, great ones, but one of the ones that I've watched that it's called The American President, right?
Right.
I'm sure you remember this. And I really love that one a lot. And I love Sutton. So I just want to assume if you were the president of the United States right now, you know, what would you, and you were to say a few words to the United States, to what's going on, what would you say to them?
I think my first move in discussion would be how important treaties are. And our present president has been relatively dismissive of a number of treaties, be it the Paris Accord, be it nuclear regulatory issues, be it the World Health Organization, be it the United Nations. These are groups which are antithetical to how I would believe the way our president is conducting himself now. So I would regain all of those treaties and at the same time speak honestly about what we have to do to improve the United Nations and to make it more effective. I am not comfortable and happy with the amount of dismissal and dismissiveness that's been going on for an organization that is so important and so helpful to us. But I think it's important, and I think we have, as a wealthy country, really gone far away from our humanitarian issues and our sense of well-being, and became very clear with this pandemic as we started to deal with economics versus the issues of people dying from this. And we're still seeing the problems and issues that may be starting too early in an effort to get the economy going, when we knew we could never get the economy going until we solve this problem with this pandemic. So things are now at a rough point. But the thing about the American President, the movie, Ishmael, is it's very nice to know what the ending is, and that's the beauty when you write a book. And by the way, congratulations on Little Family. I know it's your most recent book. It just came out and it's gotten great reviews. So I'm looking forward to reading it. But hopefully this will all make the Western world, the wealthiest part of this world, a little more compassionate and a little more understanding. And particularly in our country, we'll have a deeper understanding of what everybody else is going through, and probably not be quite as judgmental, and maybe attaining wealth is only one of the achievements one wants to accomplish in their lifetime or in a country's lifetime.
I do hope that you enjoyed the conversation between Michael Douglas and myself. We are trying to pour a little bit of humanity back into the world by having these conversations that perhaps elevate the moment and the trying times that we're living in. If you'd like to support people in need, please click the link on Liberatum link below so that this conversation will be used as a tool to support people in need around the world. Food banks in South Africa and the United States, and just supporting refugees and people in need that are less fortunate than we all are. Thank you again for listening. Stay hopeful always.